With the COVID-19 pandemic reaching all parts of the world over the past year, we're seeing an interesting shift in transport modes globally. Paris, for example, has seen an increase of 70% in cycling, resulting in over 30 kilometres of temporary cycle routes to now be made permanent, and over 200 kilometres of new cycling routes to be implemented within the coming years. It is clear that just in the past year, COVID has dramatically changed the way we look at and assess everyday transport. What did this burst of fresh new outlook on transport do in Brisbane? Did we see the same level of passion to reshape our city that places like Paris did? For a number of months, it seemed Brisbane's development industry's focus was heavily drawn to active transport, with a growing number of people suddenly rallying for pop-up cycling infrastructure throughout the city and suburbs. After all, we were seeing it happening across the world, so why not here? Unlike many cities globally, who installed temporary cycling paths during the COVID lockdown, Brisbane was not so quick to implement and has seemingly missed their chance. Cars still predominantly take up our streets, and many current cycling routes have the perception of lacking basic safety measures. Unfortunately, a major problem for Brisbane's cycling environment is one that few people know is a fundamental hurdle keeping it from establishing Brisbane as an accessible, connected, active, healthy, friendly and safe city. This hurdle is known as the gender gap. Cycling is increasingly recognised worldwide for its health, environmental, social and community benefits. Despite this, cycling continues to represent only approximately 2% of the journey to work mode share in Australia, meaning 2% of Australians choose to cycle on their daily commutes, and in Brisbane, approximately 81% of those cycling commuters are male. Research from all over the world tells us there is a key link between women cycling and the overall health and safety of an urban environment. A reoccurring theme behind the cycling gender gap is one fundamental concern deterring women from cycling that trumps all others: safety. Are Brisbane streets safe for cyclists? By extrapolating collision data in 4 central Brisbane suburbs between 2015 and 2018, we were able to compare where cyclists were getting injured with quantified data from the Street View analysis, combining Google Street View with computer vision techniques, and start to understand why these collisions were happening. As you can see, collisions were predominantly happening in these main thoroughfares, where a number of key things were found to be happening. The closer we get into the city, the level of human activity is significantly higher, particularly at peak times, with many differing modes of transport all sharing the same routes. The further out we go, topography and speed limits seem to correlate with number of incidents. But overall, we found the quality of the bikeway in terms of its separation and continuation, in addition to the amount of activity occurring on the street, including volume of cars and number of intersections, seems to have the biggest correlation with the safety of a street for cyclists. Makes sense. But what about for women cyclists? It's been found that women are more likely than men to need safer cycling facilities to encourage them to ride, and many cities, like Brisbane, seem to be failing to deliver, hence the gender gap. By taking what we knew about safety parameters for cyclists in Brisbane and comparing them with additional criteria gathered from research and gender gap surveys, such as the number of streetlights, which highlights a safety concern relating to lighting and a consideration likely not as often thought of by men, we then began to score streets based on female-friendly cycling criteria. The result? Stick to the rivers and lakes that you're used to, ladies. As you can see, compared with the bikeways along the rivers, cycling along our city streets doesn't quite work for the women of Brisbane. So while COVID allowed us to look at transport with a fresh perspective, for Brisbane, unfortunately, it wasn't able to slay the cycling beast. What could potentially get us further to Brisbane City's 2031 vision, however, is tackling issues with the cycling network through addressing the gender gap. It seems that unless we look at cycling through the lens of solving the gender gap, Brisbane is likely to continue to try cycle its way to a connected, safe city with the equivalent of a flat tyre.